they'll be within the city and they're not.
You are up, Commissioner.
All right, Bannock County Commissioners are back in session, and this is a Community Infrastructure District Act discussion education session. We've got Paul Baker and Matt Liu with us, so I'll actually, let's go around the room here real quick and introduce ourselves, and then we'll turn the floor over to you. So
Yep.
Tristan, go ahead.
Tristan Borkman, I'm the Assistant Planning Director for Bannock County.
Hal Jensen, Planning Director.
Jonathan Radford, Counsel for the county.
Ken Bullock, Commissioner.
Jeff Huff, Commissioner.
Ernie Moser, Commissioner.
Nancy Allen, Deputy Clerk.
Krista Clauser, Comptroller.
Okay, the floor is now yours.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate you.
Make sure you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Paul Baker. I'm the CEO for Pioneer, and we're a group that is looking to do a variety of different projects in and around the area, predominantly a resort project in the Bannock County area. And we would like to just kind of talk a little bit about some tools that are available here in the state of Idaho, and have you kind of mostly hear from Matt and from Stephanie here, just to talk about how those tools can be utilized in a way that is beneficial for the county as a whole, while also incentivizing and supporting development of our size and nature. And that will create a significant number of jobs. We're kind of projecting around 900 jobs, while also bringing a large number of tourism dollars into the area as well. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. These are tools that are utilized in other states around the U.S., relatively new to the state of Idaho. So there's a lot of education that's going on right now and how to utilize them effectively. And I just want to ensure that we have as many tools at our disposal as possible and utilize them in a way that benefits the county as a whole, while also, again, incentivizing us as developers to do a project of this size and nature. And so to my left, I've got Matt. Matt is out of Utah, and Matt and I have been working together for a long time now. Very well experienced with similar tools that are utilized in the state of Utah. And to my right, I've got Stephanie here, who's probably a CID specialist for the state, and is independent of us, and has a great wealth of experience utilizing CIDs in the state of Idaho. So,
perfect. Matt Liu, again, partner with Pioneer Capital Ventures. Just a little bit of background, so you can understand where I come from with my experience. I've spent 15 years in St. George City in municipal government with land development and working on several projects there in St. George City from 2003 to about 2017. And then I jumped over the fence and spent 3 years in Washington City, our neighboring city, doing the same thing. During my time there, I was overall development during those 18 years. I've been in the private sector for about 5 years now. And in the private sector is where I was able to be involved in a similar type of a product that is allowed in Utah called public infrastructure districts. What we're talking about this morning is just an initial discussion on a tool called community infrastructure districts. There's several tools available in Idaho that we may spend some time later sharing with you. Again, the idea of these tools is to enhance or attract or incentivize projects. Just in a quick nutshell, I'm not sure if anyone is golfers around the table. There was an LPGA tournament in St. George area called Black Desert. Majority of their infrastructure was funded with a PID, and that's it's a pretty big project. It's probably the only close to 4.5, 5-star resort that we have in southern Utah, other than Amangiri. But anyway, so the product has been used well in Utah, and it's also been challenged in a couple different places because of not doing it correctly. What we would propose and what we would strive to do is, obviously with great counsel and great consultants, is be an example of how these products can be used, and be kind of something that someone, whether a municipality or we're doing a project on, or a county, can point towards and says, okay, this is how this worked, and this how, you know, the specific guidelines and the specific tools that was used to make these projects work. I've had opportunities to work with a group called Piper Sandler They've been in the business for a long time. They were formerly Piper Jaffray's. It's again a financing and bonding group. They've got a pretty far wide net throughout the country, and they do these projects or these products, and been doing it for, my goodness, I think they started in the late 1800s is when they first started, and they continue to do projects as well. So they come with a lot of experience. They would be, as we trigger and as are successful in creating a community infrastructure district, they will be the folks handling the bond side, and Stephanie will be our legal side, making sure that the requirements that need to be met with these tools are done correctly. She will probably take the bulk of the remaining, since she is the expert, as far as just kind of giving us a good snapshot of what this product is, maybe touch a bit on other potential products, tools. But with that, we are grateful and appreciative that she drove here from Boise to be with us this morning. So we will turn the time to her and have her introduce herself and kind of share her expertise.
Thank you. My name's Stephanie Bonning. Before you hold Boise against me, I was born in Pocatello, raised in Idaho Falls, and just been in Boise for about the last 20 years. I've spent the last 25 years of my career representing solely government entities as both general counsel and special counsel. Continue to do so both in this area and throughout the state. I also represent all 3 solid waste districts, which of course are all composed of counties. So I work with counties quite a bit through that and through special counsel as well. And I created the Idawai Solid Waste District, which, as you may know, is Oneida County, Caribou County, Bear Lake County, and then Lincoln County in Wyoming. So I don't know if any of you have worked with local improvement districts. That was originally the tool we had that was most similar to this. And essentially the concept of that is we could build public infrastructure, and then we would do assessment against the property, and then the property owner could either pay that assessment in full, or we would sell a bond and then finance that over time. And I will add, I am also recognized bond counsel. Most of the work for these CIDs, although I do general counsel work for Avamore CID and Spring Valley CID. We have only 3 CIDs in the state currently. They're all in the Treasure Valley. Most of it is financial work, because that's essentially what a CID is a financial mechanism, just like a LID is. So I do their general counsel work, but that's mostly because it's going to be revolving around financial work anyway. So what a CID is almost like a super LID. Normally for LIDs, we do discrete projects. We're going to, put in sewer lines for a subdivision, or we're going to repair roads, and we're going to assess the people. Like, for instance, if we do a new road downtown, we may choose to do an LID and assess those business owners the cost of repairing that roadway. And then they can pay that assessment in full, or as I said, through time at a tax exempt rate. And that does make a big difference. The fact that we can fund infrastructure through a tax exempt rate, depending on the market, can cut the rate in half of what a commercial rate is. Because essentially the federal government is giving us a subsidy because it's not charging tax, and the state of Idaho does not charge tax on that as well. So what a CID does is allow a single assessment to pay for multiple pieces of infrastructure. So we do a general plan and we say, this is all the public infrastructure that's going to be built within this project. Obviously, we're talking large projects here usually, which will be done in phases, such as Avamore. And then we're going to go ahead and we'll start. I should also say that the amount of outstanding bonds is limited to 9%. So that you can't go crazy to where you'd get upside down on these. So essentially what we do is we do special assessment bonds, we build out, say, phase 1, we get an increase in the value of the property, that then gives us more bonding capacity to go in, do another special assessment bond, and then continue the infrastructure. We also have the ability within a CID with voter approval to do a general obligation bond or a revenue bond. I doubt, we have a revenue bond approved for one of my CIDs. I don't think ultimately they'll utilize that, because if you think about it, there is no revenue until everything is completed and operating and the project's essentially done. So at that point, I mean, it doesn't really help you unless they want to do some expansion. The project's been done and they decide they want to expand perhaps, and they have a good customer base already to provide that revenue. But generally, we're doing either a general obligation bond or these special assessment bonds. And the same thing with the general obligation bond. There's a limit on how much, and so as the project grows, then they can issue additional general obligation bonds. Generally, those are approved early in the process, where you have, you may only have, in all honesty, the developer's employees living on the property. In order to vote in a CID, you don't have to live within the CID, but you do have to live within the county that the CID is located in. Originally, the legislation doesn't refer to that, but we had a court case. In fact, I did a judicial confirmation on Spring Valley because we had approved over $200 million in bonds, and it was a very new mechanism. So I wanted a judicial confirmation, which is confirmation from a court that what I'm doing is legal. And so when the court reviewed all of that, they determined that constitutionally you can't allow people outside of the county to vote. You wouldn't have to be in the CID, but you'd have to be a resident of the county. And having read the decision, I can't honestly disagree with it. So I think even if it came up again, I do believe the Supreme Court would rule the same way. But anyway, essentially you do it early on when the developer has control of the property. And then what happens is generally the developer ends up paying some of the special assessments, and then of course some of those special assessments are then also placed on the property so that people then pay those off over time as they buy lots. So the developer ends up paying a portion of them, and the developer also pays all the initial general obligation bond tax levies because they still own the property. And then as the property is segregated and sold, then some of that burden is passed on to the people that live within the lots. There is a large amount of disclosure that is required both prior and at closing, in which they have to sign a number of documents in which to let them know they are in a community infrastructure district and that there are assessments that come with that, and that potentially there could be future bonds that come with that as well. So I'll stop there for a moment and see if there are any questions.
So, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So you talked about voter approval,
For the general obligation bonds, yes.
but not for...
Not for special assessment bonds.
Okay. So the voter or the landowner is the one that pays.
Taxes, but only within the boundaries of the community infrastructure district. So it doesn't affect any property outside the CID.
So just to clarify, so for the resort, if we had an infrastructure district there, it would be the resort that would be paying the fees.
Right.
Where do those fees go?
So what we do is we take out a loan and we build the infrastructure, and then the bond payments over time pay back the loan that funded the infrastructure. Now, all of this infrastructure is public infrastructure. That's why it's allowed to be tax exempt. And it is, the statutes allow the CID to operate it, but nobody, at least so far, has wanted to do that. The idea is that we build this infrastructure and we dedicate it to another public entity, because only public entities can own the infrastructure. So, you know, depending on where it is, it may get dedicated sewer and water to a city or a sewer and water district. The roads might get dedicated to the county, or if you have a highway district, whatever government entity is in that area and controls that particular service, you work with them and dedicate it to them. So they don't pay for it. They get all this infrastructure, just as when developers build subdivisions and dedicate that infrastructure. But this allows that to be financed over time at a tax exempt rate, and it does shift some of the burden to the property owners. I mean, that is the truth of it.
And maybe not so much on the resort specifically, but in other developments, it also has the opportunity to pay for like trails. Emergency, we just had the fire discussion, it could be a fire station, and stuff like that, and parks. So it's just a tool that's allowed to kind of enhance the community with various amenities.
So are these assessments, you'll utilize the treasurer's office, they go on tax bills, is that correct?
Yeah, well, you don't have to. So the CID itself is actually the one empowered to issue the bond payment, issue the assessments for the bond payments. Now, what we have done is made a contract with the county to pay the county to collect those, but that's not required. So the county wouldn't have to. It would be up to you if you'd be willing to enter into an agreement to collect those. And a lot of the CIDs, what we also have done is hire private management companies to do the day-to-day work so that the government entities don't have to worry about that. And I would also add that as part of doing the CID, this is all done in conjunction with planning and zoning. So the general plan has the overall, you get planning approval in conjunction with the CID. So for instance, the subdivision, we call a subdivision for now rather than the resort, just because it's been how it's been used in the past. So the subdivision would get all its approvals, you would know what it would look, you would have phase plans, you would have everything else, you would know what infrastructure is going to be built, have estimates, what part of that infrastructure would be financed through the community infrastructure district. So all of that is known before that community infrastructure district is actually formed. So we know that obviously you wouldn't form the district and then you don't have a subdivision that's approved. So that's done first. Now we usually do them hand in hand, so as soon as we get approval from the government entity that the project is approved from a planning and zoning standpoint, that we could move forward with the creation of the CID. And the CID board is 3 members from the underlying government entity and where the CID was created. So if it's a city, then it's 3 city council members. If it's a county, it's 3 county commissioners. And then if you have it part in a city and part in a county, then you have a mix by statute on how that works.
So who signs on the loan? Is that the developer or?
It's the government entity. It's the community infrastructure district. It is a separate political subdivision.
So the district would then apply for the loan?
Yes, the district applies for the loan, and in the special assessment, the land stands as collateral, essentially. There is a lien on that property as a special assessment that is prior in time to any mortgages or anything else and on parity with taxes. If it's a general obligation bond, then the security is a tax levy.
Okay, and then you mentioned that the whole county votes on something in relation to the CID, and I wasn't clear.
Oh, no, sorry, yeah. Everybody within the CID, anybody who owns property in the CID votes, but they also have to live in the county.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
for instance, if they don't have, if they aren't residing, because remember they have to, for regular, all other times, you have to be a resident. For CID, you don't have to be a resident, but you have to be a property owner. But you do have to be a resident within the county. It's a little strange, but.
I got that now. Okay.
But yeah, but the only people voting are the people actually that own the property, and so that have are the ones that are agreeing to pay that general obligation bond. So there is no vote on a special assessment bond, but there is a vote on a general obligation bond.
Okay.
I think also another piece, and then Stephanie, please correct me if I'm going down a different path, because I'm just more thinking on Utah. But another opportunity that this can cause is just a collaboration of the region. In other words, if there's some infrastructure there that maybe the subdivision could be involved with, that could affect positively on the neighboring municipalities, whether it's water, whether it's obviously road connectivities, sewers, whatever ups the regional area. We've had some initial conversations with Mayor Hall and Mayor Lyons, just trying to see, what their needs are and what we could do to help potentially resolve some of those needs, whether it's housing, whether it's, different opportunities there that we could bring to the table as part of this project. So I think it's really important for us to stay pretty keyed in to those neighboring communities, because we are all neighbors, and I think what we do will definitely affect those two for sure. And I think that's why it's key for us to have that communication, that collaboration between the resort and both communities to make sure that we do what's right for the area.
And so we actually just did this in Spring Valley. Spring Valley is within, initially it was platted out in Ada County. It ended up being annexed into the city of Eagle. And Eagle Sewer District is what does the sewer services for the city of Eagle. The city does water. And so Spring Valley built their plant, and the Eagle Sewer District is doing a new reuse project. And so as part of the plant that the Spring Valley, the subdivision, built, they built additional facilities that would be able to work in conjunction and help with the reuse project for Eagle Sewer District. And so that was done in collaboration. So the Eagle Sewer District, in fact, we just conveyed that plant to the Eagle Sewer District, but in addition, Eagle Sewer District got a large number of settling ponds that they needed for the reuse project.
And I think with us, might be more specifically water, maybe storage facilities that can help, just another layer, specifically from McCammon, since we're so close to McCammon, to just kind of help with whatever water system that they have currently, to try and support and maybe build a little bit more of a robust system that includes our resort and them and what their needs are currently and what their needs are could be in the future. So it's kind of it's a great tool, and it's a great opportunity to be utilized to not only look at a development, a subdivision, but look more of a regional effect and what can that bring to the region as far as supporting services.
So this can jump county-city lines, but not county-county.
At this time, the project has to be at least within an area of impact. Currently, there is discussion about legislation. We've got some legislation to tweak by the existing CID developers to do a couple other changes to the CID rules. And one of them is to look at the possibility of allowing projects just in counties that are outside of city of area of impact. So right now it can be solely within the county, but it has to be within the area of impact, and the city has to agree as well.
What about tribal ground?
Good question.
Bannock County has some tribal ground, so I'm just asking
Right.
a big question.
Good question.
Yeah, that I can't answer off the top of my head.
So if it's not in an area of city impact, the CID doesn't apply then?
Correct. Now, what I haven't looked at, because we've only had, I say they're new statutes, they've probably been in 10 or 12 years, but to me that's new and we haven't used them very much. What I haven't looked at is, and I know we don't have any cases on it, is, does only a portion of it need to be? Does the whole thing need to be? So that is something that I plan on doing some more research to see exactly.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah.
Does the whole entity have to be within the ACI?
Right. And that I don't know the answer to that. To be honest, I probably won't be able to get the answer, and then there's a couple of options we could do. We could look at pursuing legislation that just allows counties to use this tool. And obviously, a project like this could be something to say, hey, the county would love to do this. Here's all the benefits to the county, but right now, they have to annex all this into the city, which is not necessarily the best for planning and for the city infrastructure. The other thing would be to do basically a judicial confirmation, in which I ask a court, do we have the authority to create a CID that's partially within an area of impact and in the county? And then we get a court decision, and if the court says yes, then we're covered.
So one of the questions I've had is in researching CIDs, most of the best practices are in MSAs of like 50,000 and above. We're not close to that in the area you're talking about. So how did you make up that difference? Because again, we're not approaching that best practice of 50,000 or plus. What's the issue there, or what's the thought process there? Because like you're talking about in the Washington area, definitely an MSA greater than 50,000. So how would that apply here?
I'll let financial people answer that. From, like I said, from a legal standpoint, we do have a limit on how much we can borrow. So generally, we go year by year by year as the property value increases. So it's based solely on the underlying property value. Now, in a case, for instance, where
Maybe-
and then
go ahead,
oh,
sorry.
I didn't say, and then
You're good.
and then you also end up usually, I mean, maybe not in the case of resort, but in a subdivision, what we then do is subdivide as we go, and then we segregate those assessments to those smaller lots as a pro rata portion of the entire property.
So I can probably do an example. One of the first PIDs I did in southern Utah was for Tokerville. Tokerville is a town of about 1,700 residents. And we're bringing in a 1,700 acre development within Tokerville. That will be about 4,500 units. And Tokerville just adopted, they call it a policy that allows, certain qualified projects to pursue an opportunity of a PID, which is what this project did. And we did the first one there in southern Utah, and we are right now working on 4 others to help build this project out. So I think what happens, and Stephanie's correct there, a Piper Sandler would come in and do the assessment and make sure that everything adds up. If it doesn't add up, obviously we don't do it. But that'll be their role, to come in and make sure that the finances are, that fits for the project, and then they'll recommend something.
Yeah, so that principle though can be followed into additional funds also. So we would look at a different funding mechanism for, say, just a hotel versus lodges versus water, the water park side of it, or the alpine ski component. There are different funding mechanisms out there that they have their areas of specialty. And so we can kind of chop it down into kind of different chunks based on what the competitive market is doing and demanding at the time. So our goal really is to go through the phases, but we want to line up 100% of the capital stack before we even break ground. So the CID is a crucial component to determining how do we go about, from a planning perspective and from a funding perspective, to put the capital stack together in its entirety. And this is the starting point, So if we can look at utilizing the subdivision that is the resort in a way that has positive impact, and if that to the wider community, but if that also means that we have to chop it down into phases, we're completely flexible and able to do that based on the different types of asset classes that sit on that site. And so if we go into the private market and look at what the market's demanding right now, we've got a group that they just want to do housing, they want to do the lodges. They also will do both horizontal and vertical in terms of the funding mechanism that sits there on those lodges. Equally, we've got several hotel investors that want to do the hotel component. We've got folks who want to do condos. The list is long. And then we also have about 100 or so different banking institutions that would want to do the complete piece. So they would prefer to see the whole thing wrapped up and as one complete portfolio, and take the entire piece and kind of lend against the entirety of the project. So we have options at our disposal, which is really great for a project of this size. So I'm just really conscious. A project of this size, you're talking 350 million, and that price point was as of October last year. So I expect it's gone up a little bit with tariffs and things. The cost of labor. It's a 4-year build. It'll do 900 jobs, full-time jobs, and we'll have about $150 million of economic impact annually. And it's a proven model. And because it's such a good asset, there are a variety of different larger players that would want to purchase it once it's complete. And so it just gives us the full story and journey of from initial development right through to acquisition, if should we ever want to sell parts of it or all of it, So it's a complete story of financing versus just piecemealing it like a lot of other projects do.
Okay.
And additionally, especially in the early stages, for instance with Spring Valley, right now, we have a agreement with the developer that should we not receive enough revenue to make a bond payment, the developer agrees to make up that additional money. So essentially, the developer is backing up those special assessment bonds. As it builds out and you get more and more people, that may or may not be necessary. But that's part of course, what financial advisors do is decide, do we need basically a funding guarantee to back this up by the developer? Obviously, you can do all kinds of direct placement. We have been selling our bonds to an underwriter who, of course, then goes and sells them on a competitive market with offering materials. So that whole story is told there. And like I said, as part of that, you can decide whether or not to get these guarantees.
Okay.
And I guess really, to sum it up, is just basically sharing the tool, with the 3 of the county commissioners and staff. It's just to consider that tool because, like I said, whether it's a project like what we're working on or other projects throughout the county that you see might be able to fit within your 2040 consolidated plan and try and hit some of those targets or some of those goals. This is just one tool that could help other folks, not just us, but other folks to kind of help bring these projects to life. And I think that's probably our main goal this morning is just to kind of share, whether it was the LID, whether it was a CID, we've got another one called CPACE, that's the very green energy supported, conservation supported, that's also another tool that's available. Again, these are just tools to add to the toolkit to try and support and expand development.
Okay. Ken, you have a question?
I've got ugly sensors going off everywhere. I'm sorry. I have seen, I was here years ago when all the same promises were made up at Northgate, and that has not come to fruition. In fact, there's been lawsuits over it. There's movies out there condemning the public or whatever. That just scares me to no end, mostly because that's my back door. I was the mayor out there and they still have some very tough issues with water. They have a well that's gone down. They do not have enough infrastructure right now to actually sustain the town they have. We were the ones who built the additional storage space for the sewers. They don't have any additional storage space. I don't think they could survive 10% growth. So I understand how this can help the communities, but I'm looking at a 10, 20-year project for me more than a 3 or 4 year. It just scares me. I guess my other question of it is, and I know the property you're talking about, what about the people who don't want to be in that particular district? Can you exclude them like you can, like when you annex? I mean, there's already a few homes out there that'll say, nope, that's not what we want. And I know probably the owner you're talking to, because I've dealt with him for years, he's got a lot of acres up there. He may want to do that. What do you do about the congruency of everybody else around there? The other owners, can they buy in or buy out of this district? Can you do a donut and say, no, you're not part of this? Those are some of the concerns that I have. Some of those folks have lived up that canyon for years,
yes,
and they're deep-rooted.
Yes.
They're probably not looking to put a hotel right up behind them. How do you deal with and I know that's a big question, the community scares me to no end, because I know what the infrastructure takes to support that. But just in that general area of building a promise up in there, how do you form a district that say, we don't want to be obligated for this, we're on the outside of the fence, and what if they're right in the center? I'll let you answer some of those
You want to
questions.
take that, Stephanie, and reiterate, and then we can finish, we can clean it up.
Well, part of that is going to depend on whether or not, for instance, you do that as part of an annexation, because you can annex in property and leave out enclaves.
The problem with that is you have to have contiguous.
Yes, they would have to be.
And I know where the
contiguous.
annex line is, because I put it there.
Yes.
There's some issues you would probably have to struggle with that.
Yeah.
So you'd have to.
Obviously, they have to have continuity.
You'd have to follow the annexation rules to do that. And the area probably you're talking about probably could be excluded, but they're going to be impacted by that big time. So sorry I
Right,
interrupted
no,
there.
no. I mean, obviously, if they weren't annexed in, they wouldn't be included in the CID. The current CIDs I have, we don't have carve-outs, and so I'd have to look at the statutes, to be honest. I don't
Okay.
know if it would allow carve-outs or not. I don't see why not, but that doesn't mean anything, because our law is not always logical, so.
Well, even like the area of impacts, I mean, there's some line, you can't just go a mile down, run through here and cut behind. The legislature has closed some of those doors.
Well, and that's-
I would assume
right.
that the CIDs would do the same thing.
And that's part of the problem we're at right now, because part of the issue that's created, and let's just assume, for instance, they were contiguous to the city of McCammon. Prior to last year, of course, we didn't have limits on how big the area of impact could be. So if McCammon agreed to create an area of impact that included all this property, and of course, the county has to as well, you know that. The county and the city agreed to include this within the area of impact, and then it could stay within the area of impact, not be annexed due to CID. We could do that. Of course, only just last year, we got limited to 2 miles for the boundary of area of impact. So we can't
Or less.
create.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's on the maximum end, probably.
Yeah, exactly. You still, obviously, we look at the factors on where we plan to build and geographic, you guys all know all that. But, yeah, at a max limit, we can only do 2 miles. Well, of course, at the time we had the CID infrastructure, all the people doing the annexation infrastructure, which happens often in Idaho, don't really think about some of the downstream issues that is going to cause. So now we're in the issue where even if the city and the county wanted to do a bigger area of impact, they can't. And so how that's going to affect the CID, that's something I haven't dove into yet because, of course, like I said, that legislation's new from the last legislative session. And I'm in the middle of helping entities negotiate new areas of impact. But we'll have to figure out, like, how does that work? And again, that comes down to that question then, okay, we can't include them in an area of impact where we could prior to last year, but can we put a portion in and a portion out? And that's I don't know the answer to that yet because this wasn't an issue prior to last year.
Which brings up that economic impact, and I get all of that. I mean, Northgate promised so much economic impact, it was unreal. We were supposed to have the retail, the hotels. What I worry about is the solvency. There's too many external demands out there that in 5 years from now, nobody can predict what could happen. We get involved in a CID and all of a sudden everything goes default. The property owners then are stuck with the loan on that, and even though their property values, I mean, if something gets partway into this process, where do the and I know you're doing it incrementally,
Right.
but the infrastructure is where the cost is. By the time you put roads, by the time you put water and sewer, and where does that sewer go? There's environmental impacts up in that area. There's so many other things that just scare the tar out of me. And so I'm just being honest with you up front. I think you're swimming upstream. I'm not saying it won't happen, but I would be concerned if I was Mayor Hall because I was there. But that city is in trouble right now. They've got a well that went down. They're on water restrictions. They've got some new growth now they can't hardly sustain. They've got to reline some sewer already to handle existing. So now we're promising 20% growth or whatever it is. Holy cow. Those cities do not have, there's not the grants available, there's not the DEQ, there's not the funding available to help them. That would be my concern is to protect what we already have there. We don't have We don't have a Boise right 15 miles from us. We don't have a hurricane or a,
St. George.
they have the sustaining growth around them that we don't have down in South Bannock County. Those are just my concerns.
Yeah.
So,
So I again understand those concerns. There are concerns that we also share, especially when it comes to water. Our initial water studies state that we'll probably would utilize about 200 acre-feet of water on site, but we actually have the technology to recycle 70% of the water that we utilize on site and keep it all contained within the site, so that we're not having to dig too many wells or tap into existing water infrastructure. And then we're also looking at a different technology that captures water vapor from the air that will do about 300 gallons of water daily to each lodge, so that the entire resort can be self-sufficient and be completely off-grid. This is an industry that I've been in for a very, very long time. I know this industry upside down, inside and out. Previous resorts that I've built and designed and run have achieved 97.5% occupancy annually, average, and have achieved $100 to $150 million of economic impact. Those are all out in the UK and Europe. There's not been a resort of this type or design here in the US. This will be the first of its kind in terms of its environmental approach and making sure that our area of impact when it comes to negatively impacting the environment is the opposite of what we want. We actually want to utilize the environment and be sensitive to it, utilize the existing topography, design the resort in such a way that it is pleasing to the eye versus has an adverse effect on the way in which the land currently lies. And the difference between us and, say, other developers in the area is that we will focus on putting the entirety of the capital stack together before we stick a shovel in the ground. Because I'm quite aware of the suspicion and concern when it comes to any developer that is proposing to do something outside the realms of normality, and do so in a way that's sensitive and smart. I live here, I live in Idaho Falls. I'm the CEO for the Chamber of Commerce up there. I understand economics extremely well. I led an $11 billion project in the UK and understand how economics work as well. And that was 33 different locations, and it was a project called the Olympics. So I understand how there's 1,600 communities that I impacted in that development. So I get it. So it's not something that we discard. Your concerns are absolutely on point, but we are not a developer that's going to try and force or argue our way. We want to work in tandem and collaborate with the county. This is a tool that can be utilized for the county, for the cities. It will have benefit to everybody else, not just us. And so if we kind of think about those issues that you're talking about, this can actually be part of a solution to some of those issues, if utilized well. And the problem is that we are too young as a state in terms of utilizing CIDs, and we're still finding our feet with it. And so this is why we got Stephanie here with us today. This is why we've got Matt, who's done several of these down in Utah, and where we're working in a way that we want to work very collaboratively with the county and with the other cities that we're working with here in eastern Idaho. I am, in my other role, very concerned about the direction we're going as a state when it comes to urban renewal, and seeing that being up for question. We need to have other tools in our toolbox to be able to utilize to incentivize development and do it in a way that is sensitive to our region. I'm conscious that we're not a developer that's going to come in and make big promises, but we want to work in tandem, step by step and hand in hand. And I actually really mean that. I'm not trying to blow smoke up your rear ends here. I live here. I'm pretty much in the public eye on a day-to-day basis in the Greater Idaho Falls area.
Okay.
So
thank you.
that's why we're here.
And the CID has to put in the infrastructure to support itself, and may put in additional infrastructure. So to be clear, it is not relying on the city for any services. You may end up connecting to the city if it serves the city, So in conjunction with that, they may, for instance, build additional capacity in a water and sewer system if they're going to hook up to the city, which would allow this, alleviate the city's issues. But they're not going to, they're not allowed, well, they would not be putting any burden on the city's systems. They would either enhance it or they'd be self-sufficient.
Okay.
Two final questions. Financial obligation by Bannock County. And then what you're asking today is for us to create a CID. Bottom line, is that?
Yeah. So there's a process.
Yeah, but you want to talk financial
Yeah.
obligation, and then I'll talk about this.
The county has no financial obligation at all. So like a local improvement district, the CID is the one that issues the debt. Obviously, you end up being the board, but there isn't any liability to Bannock County at all. So it's a completely separate subdivision. All the bonds they're only able to be collected against the CID, or in the case of a tax levy on the CID, but the underlying county is not pledging any kind of credit at all. As I said, it may be where you get into you guys choose to collect payments, you get reimbursed for that, that would be your choice. Your obligation would be some administrative time, because you do serve on the board as the CID, so you have to vote for things. But in all honesty, I had 2 CID meetings last night. The first one was 10 minutes and the second one was 6 minutes. I've never had one longer than 15 minutes because, like I said, it's largely the funding mechanism. So it's just sort of a pass-through with the CID understanding what's going on and what we're doing and explaining everything. Obviously, as a county, you'd have issues with planning and zoning, but you're reimbursed through that, through your application fees and through any reimbursements for your professionals.
Would the CID be considered a component unit of the county?
No, it's a
Not at all.
separate political subdivision, just like a
But
city
if the
is.
board is voting on, it's because there's no financial obligation. Because
Yeah.
if the board's voting,
But the board is not voting as the county commissioner. The board is voting as
As the
the
CID.
board of the
Okay.
community infrastructure district.
Okay.
So they wear 2 hats for
Okay.
2 separate political subdivisions.
okay.
And the board's role basically is just making sure that everything has been proposed is following requirements.
Okay.
That's basically just the checks and balances. It's just another layer of making sure that that happens well. And then as far as the consideration this morning, is just if there is some consideration there, then the next step would be a formal petition document that would be submitted to the county just to review. If that document feels okay, and then we move on to the next step. That is pretty much the only, I would call it the ask, for this morning. Is if it's something that's, that's interesting about, then we want to go to the next step, then the next step would be actually reviewing a formal petition to see if that still makes sense. At any time through the process, you can always go, we're out.
That was one question. You had 2?
That was both of them.
It was,
I mean,
it was a double header. Yeah, it was a double header.
I got 2 answers from 2 different people.
Okay, that works. So at this point in time, I think we just take it under advisement, ponder it, go
We
from
appreciate
there.
your time.
Go from there.
Thank you.
thank
We
you.
appreciate your
Okay.
advice and your counsel. We are.
Well, I was going to say, I don't right where you,
Yeah.
I've seen the promises Don Haslett was going to build on the other side. You know, I've seen this through the years and it's
Yeah.
trying to go milk a cow and there's nothing coming out.
Yeah.
You know, so,
Exactly.
I'm just, and I don't want to see something go in part way
Uh-huh.
and default. We don't
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
that.
No.
And so we're protecting the county,
Mhm.
protecting the citizens, the poor little mayors,
Yes.
part-time mayors out there
Yes.
and city council trying to
Yes.
make decisions based
Yes.
on,
Mhm.
so
So we understand your.
that's on Mount. And I appreciate you guys open and honest,
Yeah.
straightforward answers, and hopefully we have that dialogue.
Yeah,
Look,
for
the
sure.
great thing about the CID is that you'll have total visibility,
Okay,
you know,
so,
which is doesn't happen that often when it comes to
Yep.
private development.
And it's very specific. It has
Yeah.
very specific requirements that you gotta meet. You can't get around it,
Okay.
you can't go through it, you just gotta meet it.
Yeah.
And it's pretty tight.
Yes.
Okay.
so is it Ivans out there that did this?
Yeah.
Were,
I did a project with Black Desert originally when it first started in Ivans
okay,
with Black Desert, and then I've done stuff in Tokerville, and then we are doing stuff at the airport as well as the old airport.
Okay.
So Tech Ridge was one of my projects, was with the city. So the rebranding, the repurposing of the old airport to a technology center, that was kind of my
Okay.
brainchild, I was involved in that.
Cool.
So all of that infrastructure is being done with the same tool.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks